The Life of Christ, 25. The Trial and the Condemnation. It's probably about midnight between Thursday and Friday when this arrest of Jesus was made. There appears to have been still among the leaders a great fear of popular uprising in favor of Jesus. If they proceeded at once publicly against him, they therefore took him first to the house of Annas, who seems to have been a man of great authority in religious matters. Old name going back 1,000 years prior to that. I forget the exact spelling, and I'm sure it's sort of Awanas or something like that is listed in Goetia, so I think that's sort of where we get that from too. Perhaps he was one of the ones who came up with the law. The one contemporary with Solomon was one who came up with the lies about him being polytheist, or that he must be practicing evil magics, or something. He who was the father-in-law of the high priest and is reported by some reputable writers as having previously been the high priest himself, but deposed by the Roman government. The proceedings, look at how in so many countries they've, the government decides who the top clerics are. The proceedings here were doubtlessly informal and tentative, rather than judicial. The leaders were still in doubt as to how far they might safely go, but it was determined to go on with the prosecution, and he was taken to the high priest, the highest judicial functionary of the Jews. The brief examination by the high priest, perhaps, indicates a desire to ascertain how far the rulers themselves had become infected with the conviction of his messiahship. The Sanhedrin, well, that would be sort of the aramia more present in their areas, to put it in the plural with an M at the end instead of an N. If it's like to the, if it's towards Arabia, then they would tend to say it with an N. I think also towards Persia, they would say it with an N too. So in the middle, people use the yim plural, which also means sea. But anyways, our great council was called together at early dawn, and in unseemly haste, they proceeded to the formal trial. There was a remarkable lack of testimony against Jesus. This was only at the last that the two false witnesses were found, who, on the slight cross-examination which some fair-minded members of the council seemed to have made, so contradicted one another that their testimony, not very important, even if true, was quite annihilated. Well, it was a culture where testimony wasn't even in today. How many countries actually have even testimonies? Accused, accuser, rich, poor, Jesus made no defense, called no witnesses, asked no questions. They at last called him to testify concerning himself. He calmly expressed his confident conviction that nothing which he could say would avail anything with them, and that the result was a foregone conclusion, and that his condemnation was determined. Well, as much as you can say that of a religious believer, if you even put him in that station, would be someone who would testify to the truth when called upon, particularly to his own innocence. But he boldly assured him of his future appearance on the throne of the world's judgment at God's right hand. He was then directly asked under the form of solemn oath to declare whether he were the Messiah and Son of God. Well, the Jews weren't expecting a Son of God, so this doesn't sound accurate, but no God before, no God beside, no God after. Isn't that what all the prophets taught? So they weren't taking the literal Son of God thing, but and the Messiah, all sorts of Messiahs, if you look at the language, Mashach, Mashach. He, with equal directness and simplicity and solemnity, affirmed that he was, and this was instantly seized upon as satisfactory evidence against him, and in token of this, The high priest gave the usual sign of distress and horror by rending his clothes. How dare you say a belief that's different than my belief? It's like, yeah. It needs to be said that this fully sustained the charge of blasphemy unless there was also evidence that Jesus was to be what he professed to be. Now, blasphemy is not the same as having a different belief. But this evidence had been furnished in great abundance before the eyes of all them, and to this Christ had continually appealed, and in view of it had already pronounced their condemnation. They had willfully, wickedly, and obstinately rejected the most palatable evidence of their own Messiah. The next step, in accordance with simple Jewish law, would have been to conduct Jesus outside of the city and then for the people to stone him to death. But there were two reasons for not doing this. One was that Judas was now a Roman province, and Jewish tribunal had not the power to inflict the punishment of death. That must be left to imperial authorities. Very likely, however, this of itself would have prevented the result. As we find, there were previous occasions on which they would have resorted to this method, even without form of trial, had not Jesus disappeared from the midst of his foes. The other reason probably was that, in the light of the recent popular enthusiasm for Jesus, it was not deemed entirely safe to risk it. In this, too, was the fulfillment of his own prediction, that he should be delivered into the hands of the Gentiles and be crucified. Well, Gentile did not just mean that they weren't Jews or that they were of a different nation or something. There was a lot more sinister terms to that. At least they were saying, oh, these people turned their back on God because they weren't Jews, which is not as simple as that. And be crucified. For both reasons assigned, it was desirable that there should be a formal condemnation of Jesus by the Roman authority, and yet it was only by the utmost urgency and clamor that Pilate, who was fully disposed to acquit him, could be persuaded to condemn him. John 18:13, 19:4 through 17, Matthew 26:57 through 75, 27, 1 through 34, Mark 14:53 through 72, 15, 1 through 24, Luke 22, 4 through 7, 54 through 71, 23, 1 through 32, Jesus brought to Annas, John 18, 13, 14, who is he? See introduction. Peter follows, is accused of being Jesus' disciple and denies, and repeating his denial once and again, as Jesus had foretold. Jesus looks at Peter and Peter's remorse. Matthew 26:58, 69 through 75, Mark 14:54, 66 through 72, Luke 22:54 through 62, John 18:15 through 18, the preliminary examination, Jesus' answer, the smiting, the remonstrance, John 18:19 through 23, Jesus sent to Caiaphas, gathering of the council, attempt to bring testimony, the evidence meager, trivial, and contradictory. Though argued to reply, he makes no defense. John 18:24, Matthew 26:57 and through 65, Mark 14:53 through 61, Luke 22:66. Jesus himself questioned and adjured. His bold, dignified, and majestic reply, his calm assumption of messiahship and divinity, Luke 22:66 through 70, Matthew 26:63 and 64, Mark 14:61-62, excitement and indignation of the council, who, on this profession, summarily condemn him, contemptuous and insulting treatment, Luke 22:63-65 and 71, Matthew 26:65 through 68, Mark 14:63 and 65. What would be the usual course after the condemnation? Why was it not pursued? refer back to the introduction. Jesus before the Roman governor. The accusation called for by Pilate. What reply was made? What did Pilate wish them to do? And what did they answer? John 18:28 through 32, Matthew 27, 1 and 2, Mark 15:1, Luke 23:1. New accusations. Was there any evidence? Luke 23:2. Pilate examines him as to the charge of setting himself up for a king. Well, if he said my kingdom is not of this world, and Hebrews says that he wouldn't have even been a priest. Where is it in Hebrews it says that? What does Jesus say as to his kingship and to his kingdom? John 18:33 through 38. The impression left on Pilate's mind. 39. Christ's silence at the accusations and Pilate's wonder. Matthew 27:12 through 14. Mark 15:3 through 5. The disposition of Pilate toward Jesus at this point and its reception by the people. Luke 23:4 and 5. The mention of Galilee and what occurred. 6 and 7. Reception by Herod. His motive. What Herod was this? The conduct of Jesus here. Insulted by Herod and his attendants. Effect on the relations between Pilate and Herod. Luke 23:6 through 12. Pilate's decision. The custom of release. Jesus or Barabbas. Historically, we can say that Barabbas was Jesus. So was Barnabas. So was Apollonius. So was the Essene teacher from a century before. Pilate's wife entreaty. Matthew 27:15 through 21. Mark 15:6 through 11. Luke 23:13 through 19. John 18:39 and 40. Pilate's continued disposition to release Jesus, overcome by the fury of the mob, he yields, but washes his hands of the crime. Well, I don't think he would yield, but this is on you. That's the sort of pompous gesture he probably would have done. Did this exculpate Pilate? Yeah, pressure from the crowd to do injustice wouldn't, especially if you have the power to subdue them. Pilate did not play around with crowds trying to boss around the Roman rulers. Matthew 27:22 through 26, Mark 15:12 through 15, Luke 23:20 through 24, Jesus delivered to the Roman soldiers their maltreatment of him, Matthew 27:27 through 30, Mark and Luke. John's account of Pilate's final action, further conversion with Jesus. Further conversation with Jesus. Okay. Fear, perplexity, vacillation, and final consent. John 19:4 through 16, remorse of Judas. Futile attempt to repair his error. His despair and suicide. Use made of the returned bribe. Matthew 27:3 through 10. Jesus carrying the cross on which he was to suffer. Another compelled to help. Matthew 27:31 and 32. Mark 15:20 and 21. Luke 23:26. John 19:16, 17. What's the stuff about take up your own cross? I mean, not necessarily lead yourself to be killed, but certainly a figure of speech that has a lot more value than the story in itself does to a lot of people. But great concourse of people, weeping women, words of Jesus to them, Luke 23:27 through 31. Arrival at Golgotha or Calvary. The customary stupefying draught offered and declined. He was offered some opium, probably laudanum, opium and alcohol. Yeah, they had that back then. Mark 15, 22, and 23. Matthew 27, 33 through 34. Luke 23, 33. John 19, 17.